Tonight's program, this is a reminder that this episode will address various topics related to my journey with mental health, amongst other things, and we'll have a reminder about multiple sclerosis as we normally do. These may be sensitive to some of our viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. We remind you to please consult your doctor, your mental health professional, your outreach group, your sponsor, or specialist before adopting any change to your dietary, physical, and/or mental health regime. If you're looking for options with respect to mental health, contact SAMHSA. That's the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration at 1-800-662-HELP. That's 1-800-662-4357. The service is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and is a confidential free information service for individuals and family members facing such stressors. Importantly, if you're feeling suicidal crisis or emotional distress and need to be put in touch with a crisis center, call or text the Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 988. Once again, 988. Or go to 988lifeline.org. Those resources are also available 24/7, 365. You are not alone, and you don't have to go through this alone. You are worth it. And this wouldn't be a disclaimer unless I talk about something that is near and dear to me over the last 2 years, but quite frankly, the last 11 to 12 with my first demyelinating event, but the onset of the multiple sclerosis diagnosis back in January of 2021. The National MS Society is a collective of passionate individuals who want to do something about MS now. That is, to move together towards a world free of multiple sclerosis. Multiple sclerosis is comprised of unpredictable and often disabling flare-ups of the central nervous system. Such flare-ups disrupt the flow of information within the brain and between the brain and the body. The National MS Society is the largest private funder of MS researchers in the world. They're investing more than $1 billion to date. MS stops people from moving, but the National MS Society exists to make sure that MS doesn't. To contact the National MS Society, please call 1-800-344-4867. Once again, 1-800-344-4867, or go to their website at nationalmssociety.org. Thank you. Thank you to all of you who have gone to the National MS Society to learn more about multiple sclerosis and demyelination, or have even gone to the National MS Society to donate money to this amazing organization. It touches me and over to 1 million people in this country who have multiple sclerosis in so many ways, and we appreciate all of you. And on that, let's begin. We've talked about mental health a lot on this show over the last 5 seasons. And tonight is basically a step back to talk about how everything, whether it's a question of the overeating, obesity, the alcoholism, the compulsive gambling, and the codependency, how all of that stems from just not taking care of my mental health. So we're going to talk about that tonight. We're going to go back to the steps that had to be taken first before everything else followed. And of course, we'll take your questions and comments because this is the Venture Forward. Wrong graphic. Oh man, I did that again for the third time in a row. Welcome to the Venture Forward. I'm Jeff Venturini, a recovering addict of overeating, obesity, alcoholism, and compulsive gambling, and it's an honor and pleasure to see all of you tonight on YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, and Twitter. This is an interesting topic. It's a topic we've talked about before, but I think in light of things that have been going on and the fact that the last time we got together, we talked about the different modalities of mental health and the importance of mental health, it was worth taking a step back and going back to talking about my story and why, as someone referred to it even today, in that it is an onion, and sometimes we have to peel back the layers of the onion to figure out exactly what is going on, what is wrong. So we're going to go back down memory lane and talk about that. Because in order to talk about the obesity, in order to talk about the alcoholism, in order to talk about the gambling and the codependency, we have to start thinking, am I seeing the right sort of health? Am I thinking about things up here and trying to get myself to a matter of just getting myself free of these sort of things, trying to get myself into a better environment, trying to take care of myself? More times than not, we seem to forget about that. And I think more and more, I truly think that people are starting to realize how important it is and how we basically fall victim to our compulsions and to our basic addictions, so to speak, if we don't take care of what's going on upstairs. So let's go back and talk about what the tail of the tape was, as far as when was that moment and how did everything start peeling back in order for me to live a better life. So this is episode 5.5, November 8th, 2022, my journey with mental health. And this might be some things we've discussed before, but I'm trying to put everything together so you understand exactly what has happened. And in this way, we could talk about what we can do going forward. The sort of things that we seek out to figure out exactly what can I do to improve my mental health. Because there's one thing to say, hey, you should see this sort of therapist, or you need to do this sort of thing. But if we're doing an ongoing research, if we're doing an ongoing sort of discovery of what we are capable of doing, but also what sort of help we can get, our world really opens. So let's go back a bit and talk about what that turning point was. And every time I bring this graphic up, I remember how miserable that person was. This was a person who was 480 pounds and absolutely miserable with his life. Someone who wasn't in a good place at all. Someone who basically used the console of overeating, the console of alcoholism, the console of gambling to just deal with things. Because more times than not, he was being squelched and shunted. His opinion did not matter, and he was around environments that did not help. Where it was the sort of thing where it was just basically part and parcel to do things that weren't the best for him. Was there any sort of thought that, hey, maybe a health kick would have been the right thing to do? The fact of going to the gym or trying to work on oneself. Yeah, the thought was there, but it never was basically celebrated. It was never taken up for full effect. And even then, there was a lot of things going on underneath the covers, in the sense that it was never appreciated or it was never encouraged. Going back to a thought for a second, we are a product of the environment we keep. If we are in an environment that's going to knock us down every time we try to do something for ourselves, what do you think happens? I'll tell you, nothing really good. Now, not to say that it was terrible, not to say that it was a terrible environment altogether, but it was definitely not an environment where one can definitely live their better life. They weren't. I wasn't. So you're talking to someone who is 480 pounds and, as I've said before on this show, was slowly killing himself. So it took a badge photo back in January of 19 to say, oh my God, what the heck's going on here? That's my badge photo. That's, in fact, I still have it on my desk. Here it is. That's my badge photo. It's someone who is totally not the person that you're talking to now. Someone who basically now gives a total care about himself, that has drawn the love back inside, wisdom and honesty and care for himself so he can share it with everybody else. But that took mental health. That took going to see a therapist. That is trying to figure out why everything else was being thrown in front of him and not taking care of what is most important, his brain, his mind, himself, before he could take care of anything else. This timeline we shared on the last episode, but it's worth going back down this road in the sense that the diet started in February of 2019, February 16th, but it wasn't until the middle of April of 2019 where I started going to a therapist that was for internal family systems. But even then, there were some things that were still going on that were not helping one iota. There was drinking, there was alcoholism, and it wasn't until a fateful night on May 30th of 2019 where I drank way too much. Way too much. 2 pitchers of margaritas, a bottle of wine, bourbon, Manhattans, which ended up with a reversal of fortune at 3:45 in the morning the next morning. That made me realize, 1, I'm trying to lose this weight. There's no reason or no sort of utility why I'm doing this. But second of all, I don't feel well. And I didn't. My eyes were bloodshot for the next 7 days. I did not feel well from a gastrointestinal sort of way for the next 5. So needless to say, I wasn't eating much the next few days because I felt like absolute garbage. But that, as far as my drinking, was my bottom, and I did not have a drink ever since that point. Because again, compulsion runs deep, and I wasn't treating compulsion, and I wasn't treating that need of, well, that margarita was good, let me have another one. You know what, let me have 2 pitchers of it. That sounds fantastic. So that was the last night I drank. And then going through therapy, starting that in July, was really important. In fact, you know you're in dire need for therapy when you spend a 4-hour session with your therapist on your birthday in 2019. There's no joke. Back on July 31st of 2019, I spent a 4-hour session with my therapist. If that's not any sort of indicator that I'm really trying to work on what's going on upstairs, I don't know what is. We go through the rest of 19, there's a separation. We talk about the financial difficulties. We go to an audit in 20, a divorce in October of 20, and then, of course, we bring up the story about the multiple sclerosis in the sense that on New Year's Eve of 2020, I end up going to the ER of Chester County Hospital with what was demyelination on top of the demyelination I had back in 2011. Get diagnosed with MS in 2021. The Chapter 13 bankruptcy follows. So, needless to say, there are a lot of things that took place. But if it wasn't for that act of me trying to figure out what's going on, I don't know if I survive. That includes the weight loss. That includes the sobriety. That includes not gambling anymore. As you can see, it is really a peeling back of the onion. Let me go back to Maine for a second. The story is never an easy one to tell, but I think the more people listen to this, the more you start to realize that there are a lot of people in this boat. And the one thing I hope if you're a first time viewer, welcome to the Venture Forward. Muchly appreciated for you joining us tonight. But even if you are a returnee and you love watching the show, and I appreciate all the viewers that have become family, if you realize that there is nothing that we can't do if we couldn't put our minds to it. We are definitely capable of anything, but we have to start with our mind. If we believe it, we can do it. We have Robin's Buys and DIYs over on YouTube who says, "Hi JV." Robin, good evening. So when we talk about the numbers, it's worth also talking about this, which is a sawtooth that we really can't believe is here, but let's go there for a second. The weight loss that has taken place since 19 is the third time I've lost this weight. In 2001 to 2003, I lost the weight for the first time. I ended up putting that weight back on, as you can see. We get to 2010, and there's a realization at 440 pounds that, okay, the weight's come back en masse, and plus another 25 on top. I have to do something about it. So I go back down the road to try to lose this weight. And I do so to about 190 or 195 pounds of it to 2011. But guess what? The weight started coming back on. And kept on coming back on and on and on. And we get to 480 in January of 2019. There's a problem. I wasn't looking at why I was doing what I was doing. There wasn't any sort of mental homework that was going on. Now, was there therapy in 2011? Yes, there was. But one of the things we've talked about on the show is the importance of how we must take therapy seriously. It is hard work. We have to do our homework. We have to come to these sessions ready to work and ready to really have open and honest discussions on why we're doing what we're doing. And if we're not willing to do that, the therapy isn't worth it because you're not putting your whole self into it. In 2019, that changed. And it continues to this day. I still see therapy on a weekly basis. But I put in my homework for this. I do everything I can to try to get myself better. And it's an ongoing story. I keep on working at it. So if you think about exactly what has gone on here, with me being 425, 440 pounds, then going down to 195, 190, and then going back up to 440, and then getting down to 245, and then shooting all the way up to 480, and now me down to the 170s. The reason why I'm staying down here in the 170s, and I'm actually doing things I've never done before, like running races and muscle, basically building muscle and really taking good care of myself. The reason why that's the case is because I keep on working on what's going on up here. If I don't do that, I don't have a chance to survive. And for many, many reasons. And I am very committed to this. The fact that in my case, where I am right now, there really is no alternative. I've lost this weight for the third time. I, quite frankly, am lucky to be alive. To gain and lose 190 to 220 pounds, in this case, losing 312 pounds in this last, and I say last because this is not going to come back on, in this life, in this sort of constant yo-yo. There's no alternative. I can't gain it back. We always talk about yo-yo dieters in the terms of 30, 40, 50 pounds. I am an extreme case of that. 200, 200, 300. Over time, that causes damage. And it'll take a good long time to figure out exactly what that damage is. I can only tell you, neurologically, I'm sure that's a part of what's going on here. It's the fact that there have been these massive weight drops and weight gains and weight drops. But again, I am not a cardiologist. I'm not a neurologist. I'm only talking by conjecture. But the one thing I know is I'm living the best life I can now. I'm doing things that I really, really have wanted to do my entire life. And I keep on trying to do so each and every day. It doesn't have to happen every day. Every day is a life of its own. And that's okay. That's what the amazing piece of this journey is rolling with the punches and doing the best we can each and every day, one day at a time. But I'm in a much better place now than I've ever been. And it's because I'm working on what's going on up here. We talk about internal family systems. I'm going to just go back to this slide real quick. We've talked about this before, but it's worth noting. How did I become aware of IFS? Two dear friends of mine down in Raleigh, and that of Stella and Rebecca, taught me about IFS. It was a therapy modality of their choice that have really helped them, and without an unequivocal doubt, it has helped me. It's a way that we could go through suffering, basically the drops of life, in a sense that there might be a setback, and dealing with how we could work around it. But also really becoming true with oneself no matter what the situation may be. If you work a job that involves travel, being comfortable wherever you're going, in the act of traveling, spending 2, 3, 5 days somewhere, when there used to be a world where I had a problem with traveling, going to that sort of therapy and becoming very well aware of my many parts and all the parts that are definitely comprising myself, honoring those parts have become really much important in this. And then also go to point 3. I'm looking to always better my scenery, better things to do, better life. If you told me 4 years ago I'd be running races, I'd be running a marathon, a half marathon, a 10K, and a 5K in the same year, there was no possible way. And yet in 2022, that has just happened. I've run a 5K, a 10K, a half marathon, and a full marathon in the same year. We've referred to it on VF Talks this past week as a Grand Slam. I accomplished that Grand Slam on Sunday. But that would have never been possible 3 to 4 years ago. And it's more than just my body. It's my mind too. It's my mental health. That working part and parcel, and in such true honesty, allows me to do what I'm doing. But I can't overlook the fact that it starts upstairs. We have Roy joining us on YouTube who says, such great achievements. Thank you, Roy. I appreciate that. It's a list that will continue to grow. I'm working on the next thing. We talked about this last week as well. I'm spending Thanksgiving weekend in a turkey trot one day, and on the very next day I'm running a half marathon. And like, I think about it, and it's like, I'm totally okay with this. It's very feasible for me to do that sort of thing. But if you even turn back the clock a year ago, there had been no way. But that's because I'm working towards it. I'm becoming very well aware of what I'm capable of doing, and not over pushing myself, and listening to my body and listening to my brain. But anything's possible when we put our minds to it. That's an example without question. Another thing that we briefly touched upon earlier in the year is something called humanistic therapy. And the reason why I'm raising this actually has another meaning, and it's more of a preview for Thursday night, but let's talk about it now. Humanistic therapy is a term that was coined by a psychiatrist by the name of Carl Rogers. He lived from 1902 to 1987. This sort of therapy talks about people that are fully functioning and people that are trying to live their best journey they can. So basically opening to experiences of many different types, living each moment fully, without any hesitation, without fear. If there's fear, it's a basic sort of signal for someone, but it's not exactly something that should paralyze them from doing it. They increase their trust of themselves as they experience things in life. It's part of the journey. When you do something for the first time, you may not be trustworthy of the situation, but when you complete it, you'll say, oh, can't believe I did that. And go back to the example I just cited of a marathon. That marathon I ran in Portland, was I scared? You darn straight I was. And when I finished it with my legs being sore than you know what, and my shoulder being sore, the next words that came out of my mouth is, I'm doing this again next year. And what other races can I run? But when we do something and we successfully complete it, we develop the trust of ourselves. So basically, it's living life on life's terms. It's living life on our terms for life too. Believing in a freedom of choice, being fully free of doing whatever we want to do in this life, albeit in my case responsibly, but being free to choose which way we want to go, and also being free to be creative. If we talk about my story with codependency and how it's being squelched and shunted, there were a lot of times where I was trying to be creative and it wouldn't basically pass muster across any sort of serious conversation about what I'm trying to construct. And when you're in an environment that is like that, that should tell you that you might need to change some things up about that. Because as we've said before, we are the product of the environment we keep. And if we put ourselves in an environment that does not trust ourselves and that does not love us the way we should love or be loved, and that by way of osmosis turns into a situation where we don't love ourselves the way we should love ourselves. You see, it's cyclical without question. So we should have the freedom to be creative. In all of this, to be reliable and constructive too, it goes back to the momentum of actually completing things. When you know that you have the chance to be prosperous, to getting stuff done, you can become reliable and constructive. But if you're getting kicked in the shins and you're being thought of, if you're being given thoughts where the things that you're doing is not right, or why are you doing that sort of thing, when you're basically being naysayed half to death, what good can come out of that? Not much at all. When you combine all that together, you end up living a rich, full life. The reason why we talk about Carl Rogers, and this is a bit of a preview for Thursday, is the sense that a growing phenomenon across various applications in social media, whether it is your Google Play Store or the Apple App Store, the iPhone App Store, etc., talks about AI bot conversational therapy. And what you'll find is a lot of AI conversational therapy is resolved around humanistic therapy, basically the work of Carl Rogers. When you have bots, they're actually producing therapy that goes to the sort of testament and are helping people on a day-to-day basis to vast success. That should tell you that is the marriage of technology, artificial intelligence, but also trying to help the human mind, the human experience. We're actually going to talk about a service on Thursday by the name of Replika, and how incredible and what sort of insight that could be driven from a service like Replika using humanistic therapy, the work of Carl Rogers. It's one of the few modalities we'll be talking about on Thursday. But the fact that we are using AI technology and using that to help mental health across human beings is absolutely incredible. So I'm looking forward to talking about that on Thursday for sure. When we talk about Carl Rogers, we also talk about something called talk therapy. We've discussed this before, but 4 key points in the sense that therapy is important for our mental health as much as seeing the doctor is important for our physical health. That goes without saying. The time I spend with my therapist on a weekly basis is just as important as the time I spend with my primary care physician. The setting is there for you to be as open and honest as you can be without hesitation so you can live the best life you can. But the sessions are only as good as what we bring to it. As I mentioned at the top, it is as good as the homework we do for these sessions. If we're not willing to do the homework, we're not getting the best we can out of these talk therapy sessions. The third thing is that the purpose of talk therapy is to help identify issues that cause emotional distress, for whatever reason it may be. For some people, these are issues that are complex and may basically create a diagnosis of depression or anxiety, which is absolutely fair. If you're going through a DSM-5 and it comes to the point where, hey, there is a chance that the patient might be anxious or dealing with depression, then it's basically the best form to have that sort of diagnosis, to make that sort of deduction, so treatment can actually begin, whether it is more talk therapy or working with a psychiatrist to actually get to medication. Now, I, for one, am not the sort of person that have taken medication for my mental health, but there are many people in the world that do, and there's nothing wrong with that. And if it requires the work of the DSM-5 through a talk therapy session to say, you know what, we might be talking about depression or anxiety that might need to be treated through medication, and so be it. But without talk therapy, I don't think we get anywhere near there. There is also physical sort of exams that can happen that a psychiatrist may, basically give their patient, but therapists have the way of doing talk therapy, psychotherapy, to work on exactly what's going on. And that, more times than not, produces very effective results. As Winston Churchill said, to improve is to change. To be perfect is to change often. So it's an ongoing process without question. Marilyn joining us on YouTube says, hi JV, it looks like I'm going to have to catch this on a rerun with 3 waves and 3 purple hearts. Well, 3 waves and 3 blue hearts right back at you. Glad you're joining us this evening. We talk about the toolbox. It's worth mentioning again, these are portions of my toolbox that are used on a daily basis, in the sense that journaling is a daily experience for me, maybe multiple times in a day. Meditation, daily. Therapy, once a week. But there's also times where I will go to other sort of resources to figure out exactly what's going on. Group sessions, that is at least a couple times per week. The thing is this. We form a trusted circle, basically a community of like-minded people that are working towards the same goals. Within that inner circle, it is a sort of fear factor, but it's also a comfort to be transparent to them. To this trusted circle, to our journal, to ourselves, to our therapists, to our support groups. All 5 of these things should work in tandem. As we basically provide advice across these 5 resources and they provide us advice back, it is on us as others are doing the same. So it works part and parcel. I'm using that phrase again, but it's a two-way sort of speak. Having everything work together allows us to live our best possible life. And in my case, it doesn't matter exactly where or when or how. I deal with groups of different kinds. I have groups that deal with physical fitness. I have groups that deal with recovery. I have groups that deal with live streaming. And each one of these groups have just as much importance as the other, because they make me who I am as I make them who they are. Again, full circle. But that also goes to the theory that we are a composition of parts, and we should honor all of those parts. One thought that we've mentioned before that I really want to quickly touch upon is the idea of journaling and what should I journal. For some people, journaling ends up being something that is a very tough bridge to cross. But once they start, and once you start, you realize that one, you think of why haven't I done this a long time ago? Why am I just starting to do this now? But secondly, I can't believe how freeing it is for me to have these moments, pen and paper or hand to keyboard, where I'm basically doing this sort of, as I say on the slide, doing basically a brain dump, a brain drain, but just getting it out there and becoming one with what's going on. When we hold it in, when we bottle it up, there's nothing good that comes out of that. I feel that the only way you know what's going on is by writing it in a journal or typing it in your journal and becoming one with what's going on. In my case, I use something called Day One. So it's not necessarily prose or poetry. It is more times than not a video entry or an audio entry. But again, it's me being transparent to myself. And it's also a question of, this is a situation where there are no limits. It's unconditional. So I should be as euphoric or as traumatic as humanly possible in these sort of things. If I want to cry, I cry in my journal. I've done that before. If I'm angry, I scream at my journal. That's happened before. You're basically being given an unconditional form to be open and honest about what's going on. And that's healthy. And even if it's a question of when I'm done writing this, I'm going to destroy the page, that's fine too. But at least you're doing the exercise of getting it out there. The last thing that came out of this New York Times article is the fact that writing can be the practice that gets us closer to healing. And you'll find that many therapists actually check to see if we're doing that work. A therapist doesn't need to know exactly what's in your journal. A therapist is more interested on the fact that you're actually doing it, that you're actually coming up with that sort of nightly reflection or morning reflection. That's very much an important thing. You think about reflections. I try to do one in the morning by way of an audio journal entry or an evening or a video journal entry. There are some times where I will do a morning and evening one with either a gratefulness or a gratitude list or a list of things I want to accomplish or things that I want to get a better sense of what's going on. These lists could basically be the topics of any sort of regular sort of basis of thought. Gratitude lists usually end up being a very popular one, and I'm very up to date with my gratitude list, to say the least. But when we're talking about recovery as well, we're talking about, the people that we might have done a wrong against and making amends. That's part of the steps. And that in itself ends up being part of a journal, whether it is a journal that you're keeping your steps or it is a general sort of page within a journal. Again, it is being open, it's being honest, it's being transparent, and it's writing things out so you can become one with what's going on. Lastly, and I think this works really well for tonight, but we're going to go to language of letting go for November 8th, in a sense that tonight's language of letting go has something to do with being true to ourselves. William Shakespeare said, "This above all, to thine own self be true, and it must follow, as the night the day, thou canst not then be false to any man." And be true to yourself, in other words. To thine own self be true. A grounding statement for those of us who get caught up in the storm of needs and feelings of others. Listen to the self. What do we need? Are those needs getting met? What do we feel? What do we need to take care of our feelings? What are our feelings telling us about ourselves and the direction we need to go? What do we want to do? What do we want to say? What are our instincts telling us? Trust them, even if they don't make sense or meet other people's rules and expectations. Sometimes the demands of other people and our confused expectation of ourselves, The messages about our responsibility towards others can create a tremendous, complicated mess. We can even convince ourselves that people-pleasing, going against our nature, and not being honest is the kind, honest thing to do. It's not really. It's not true. Simplify. At times we need to go back to basics. We gotta let go of the confusion. By honoring and respecting ourselves, we will be true to those around us, even if we displease them momentarily. To thine own self be true. Simple words describing a powerful task that can put us back on track. Today, I will honor, cherish, and love myself. When confused about what to do, I will be true to myself. I will break free of the hold others and their expectations have on me. And that is the language of letting go. When we think about codependency, when we think about the concept of being shunted and squelched, more times than not, it is other people that throw things in our way that make us feel less than thou. We're not being true to ourselves. And at the end of the day, it is about being true to ourselves. If you want to take the concept of internal family systems, it's the concept of being true to all of our parts. But we have to be true to ourselves. On the next episode of The Venture, we talk about alternative modalities of mental health. We kind of previewed the concept of using AI bots as far for therapy. We'll get into that a bit more. We'll also talk about hypnotherapy and energy healing, both of which have been something I've basically grown to over the last 6 months. So we'll talk about exactly what's involved in that and what really great things come out of it, especially with prior life regression. We'll talk about that too. And then on Friday night, we will do what we do every Friday night. We'll have a conversation about anything and everything with Matt Haas, Paul Burke, and all of you. There's a reason why I look forward to Friday nights, and VF Talks is definitely one of them. That's at 6:30 Eastern, 3:30 Pacific on Friday night. The conversation about alternate modalities for mental health. That will be Thursday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. But until then, I'm going to say the same thing I say at the end of every Venture Forward in VF Talks. Stay safe, stay sane, stay strong, stay sober. You're worth it. Have a wonderful night. We'll see you Thursday night for the next episode of The Venture Forward. I love you all, and fly, be free.